Hello and welcome everybody. Jerry Donahue here. Welcome to this workshop, the 9 principles to support people with presence. It's exciting for me to share this information with people because I value passing on all the hard work I've been doing and the research over the years, and I love to pass it on to other helping professionals. So some practical things before we start. Everybody should be muted as they come in. So if you come in and say hello as you entered, no one responded, that's because no one can hear you. We will have a time where I'll open things up for questions. The way that'll happen will depend on how you connected to the conference. If you connected by a computer device with video, there will be I think a more button in the navigation bar on your screen that will, if you click it, I think it'll give you an option to raise your hand, and I'll see your hand raised, and then I can unmute your audio. You can ask your question. For people on a phone with audio only, if you hit the *9, that'll indicate on my screen you raised your hand, and I can unmute you as well. Okay, so this workshop is designed for life coaches, therapists, spiritual teachers, yoga teachers, body workers, and healers of all kind who want to optimize your transformational gifts and skills and make a profound contribution to others. The workshop's also for people who are experienced meditators or have done a lot of psychospiritual work and want to use their experience to move into doing coaching on a more formal level. And as we proceed, I encourage you to jot down your questions. And if for some reason I'm unable to get to your question during the presentation, I'll stay after the hour to make sure I get your question. Or you can shoot me an email at jerry@innerpresencecoaching.com. Before I share what we'll be doing in the workshop, I want to briefly introduce myself to those who don't know me. I've been teaching people compassion and communication in workshops and courses for the last 15 years. Learning and teaching this work gave me the gift of experiencing the value of emotional connections and deep empathy, with myself and others. And for me to learn to be empathetic with one's inner world and empathetic with others is, to be connected to the flow of life. And concurrently with teaching these compassion classes, I also facilitated groups using integration of compassion, experiential depth psychology, along with the Eastern Enlightenment awareness practices. This integration was the result of years of studying and experiencing firsthand experiential psychological approaches and the various Enlightenment awareness practices. Both of these bodies of wisdom had something unique to offer, and so I experimented with integrating the best of both worlds. And as I did that, three burning questions emerged that drove the development of the inner presence inquiry work. As you may know, many Enlightenment approaches talk about transcending the ego or dropping the sense of self or realizing the self is illusory or empty. These are considered the definition of liberation or the end of suffering. So the first question I have was this, it's like, how can we deconstruct and see as illusory the sense of self or the ego if it's partially abiding in the subconscious? I figure you can't deconstruct, the beliefs or constructs that comprise the sense of self if you're not aware of them. And this question led to 2 other important questions when developing this integration. The first one was, how can I use depth psychology in a non-dual enlightenment framework without detracting from the non-dual enlightenment framework? And if I was going to use that enlightenment framework as the overarching context for the inquiry work, how can I bring in psychology work, depth psychology work, without diminishing the effectiveness of that work? So these were pretty big questions, and the answers came from working with myself and others over the years and honing the system of inquiry. And from that, a set of principles emerged that integrates and honors the essence of the Eastern Enlightenment approaches with the best of the Western depth psychology or personal growth approaches. And it produced a system of inquiry that is I consider efficient and facilitates what I call effortless transformations. So I'm going to share some of these principles with you in this workshop. And my hope is that you'll be inspired by these principles to either begin to incorporate them into your practice or to be curious to explore further. And to be honest, I hope this workshop will stimulate interest in you and you'll resonate with the work to the extent that you'll consider taking the 9-month Inner Presence course I got starting next month on September 14th. And there's more information about that on the website, innerpresencecoaching.com. All right, so let me ask you this. As helping professionals, what do we want most? If you're like me, you want to dramatically impact your client's well-being, where you can really feel satisfied or energized about your work. I'm sure you experienced this. You support a client that had some limitation or challenge, and as a result of your support, they no longer had that limitation or challenge. I don't know about you, but when I see people thriving and connected to life in ways that they were not doing before they worked with me, that gives me a sense of meaning and purpose with the work that I do. Like I made a difference in their life. As I experienced clients like these, I began to ask myself serious questions about transformation. The first question was, how effective or efficient am I at inspiring transformation and with my clients? And the second question was, how deep are these transformations? Are they just surface changes, or are they coming out of the depth of their being? A related question is, how many of them have life-changing transformations that are lasting? And then how frequently is this occurring with my pool of clients? So increasing the depth of transformations so that they are lasting and permanent, and learning to be efficient and effective at inspiring these transformations with more frequency became the focus of my practice. So this begs another question, is how do you increase the depth and frequency of transformations with clients? Well, the first place I started was to have a clear and consistent definition and theoretical framework about what deep transformation is and is not. Over the years, I've coined a couple of phrases that I use. One is effortless transformation, and the other one is effortless self-corrections. And these words, they describe the tremendous shift in reality people experience as a result of doing deep inner awareness work. That once this shift is in place, it does not require further effort on their part to maintain beyond the initial integration period. Excuse me. So facilitating this uncontrived, authentic, permanent change became the ultimate contribution I can make to clients. So I developed this inner presence inquiry system around effortless permanent change. So let's dive into these principles that support that intention. The first is holding a high degree of presence to prevent inadvertently adding to a client's or student's conditioning and constrict them further. This is kind of like the medical oath of first do no harm. You know, the psycho-spiritual version might be, you know, first don't add to the client's conditioning and constrict them further as you try to help them transcend their conditioning. There are many ways we can do this. For example, anytime I notice a strong agenda or an attachment that things going a certain way in a session with a client, that's a cue to me that I'm abiding in a low degree of presence and I'm identified with my own conditioning. Another example is being biased about what is and is not explored by the client in the session with what I suggest. So getting clear about what is and is not a high degree of presence to me is an important consideration when wanting to support people from presence. So what is a high degree of presence? How do you know you're abiding in such presence? For me, I think about presence as residing on a spectrum. You know, on one side there's low degree, and the other side is a high degree of presence. And let me use a typical example, an interpersonal example, just to illustrate this principle. If you ever had a loved one come home and they had a challenge they wanted to share with you, and maybe they're, you know, in pain in some way, and have you ever been preoccupied with what you were going to say next while listening to the loved one? Or maybe your thoughts went off on a tangent thinking about ways to solve the challenge your loved one was expressing, or maybe you're just preoccupied with your own day and what happened with you, and you were kind of half listening. I would say these are ways of listening that would be representative of a low degree of presence, obviously. On the other hand, if you're listening to the loved one with an absence of these conceptual overlays, I believe compassion, empathy, spaciousness would kind of spontaneously emerge in you. Your loved one would see in your eyes how you were there for them. You know, you're not preoccupied. So I would consider this a high degree of presence. So the notion of a high degree or low degree of presence is obvious in these external situations, interpersonal situations. But when you start navigating in your inner world, it can be, you know, a bit confusing. Whether you're looking at, when you're looking at the inner landscape, you know, are you doing so with a high degree or a low degree of presence? So if there's something inside us that is hurting, that needs attention, are we listening to this part of us with openness and spaciousness, a high degree of presence, or do we have another part of us getting out the toolbox ready to fix and figure things out for us? So let's do a quick exercise to deepen our understanding of this principle I'm speaking about here. So I want you to think of some aspect of yourself you don't like, or you hate that you have this characteristic or quality or behavior in yourself. Just think for a moment about this. Maybe think back to some time when you were upset at yourself. So just take a moment for that. And if you zeroed in on something, I want you to think of a specific context in which this part of you that you don't like was active a specific time and a place. So I want you to just imagine yourself being in that scene where this party you don't like was active in that specific context. And as you're imagining that, what feelings arise in you about that part of you don't like? What were the feelings, and what was this? What does it want that it's not getting when it sees that part of you don't like? So hopefully you came up with something, some kind of feeling that you had about that part of you don't like, and maybe you came up with some kind of need or value around that that wasn't being met. Okay. So what I was hoping you'd get just by doing this quick exercise is, first of all, if you were like going to go do work on that particular part of yourself that you don't appreciate or like, more than likely you would go do the part of you that doesn't like it would be the thing that would be leading your process. It'd probably take you to somebody to support you, and then in a session itself, it would be the thing that would want to get rid of that part or do something about it. Okay, and getting rid of something inside of yourself is not supporting that part of yourself from presence. I know this exercise can be a little confusing, so let me give you an example. So suppose a client comes to me and says she's disgusted and sick and tired of being at the mercy of her perfectionist part that causes so much stress and anxiety when doing tasks. Automatically, in my mind, I'd be hearing a part that's disgusted, looking at the perfectionist part. Now, as a coach, if I chime in with the disgusted part of the client and say, yes, let's see if we can get rid of this perfectionism, I'd be colluding with their lack of awareness of the disgusted part that they are identified with and are speaking from. That part of that is disgusted with the perfectionist part is not very accepting or empathetic or even compassionate towards the perfectionist part. It just wants the perfectionist part to change, to go away. So if I'm unwittingly colluding with such non-acceptance and non-empathetic energy, I would consider this me operating out of a low degree of presence. So what happens in the same situation if the coach is holding a high degree of presence? What would be different? Instead of unwittingly chiming in with the client's disgusted part, the coach can support the client to stand in presence and become aware of both their disgusted part and then facilitate the client connecting with the disgusted part in an empathetic way. And after stepping back into presence and connecting with this disgusted part, you can support the client to connect with the perfectionist part in an empathetic way. And when the client connects to the perfectionist part in an empathetic way, this leads the client to connecting to possibly unconscious parts that are associated with the perfectionist part. And these deeper unconscious parts are where the client's innate intelligence and wisdom emerge to enact these effortless transformations that I've been referring to. So when you're coaching people to do inner work, what aspect of themselves are leading the inquiry? And what aspect of the coach is supporting the inquiry? That's an important question. And if you value effectiveness, then you need to keep in check whether it's presence or some part of you, that's some of your conditioning, because it affects the depth of connections. So I hope you can see the dilemma we're in turning our attention inward to do inquiry work. We need some wider context, some bird's eye view to lead the inquiry. To me, this is simply a learning challenge from the part of the coach and the client as well. Okay, so principle number two is working with clients to have insights that come from an emotional experiential level instead of insights that come from an intellectual level. So why is it important to work on an emotional level? For me, feelings are the viable conduit or pathway in which we can access the deep emotional implicit memories and or body fixations which are locked away and are well protected. These implicit memories / fixations have associated constructs and beliefs or emotional schemas that limit or cause challenges in our life. So finding a viable way to access them is important. So let me again look at a admittedly oversimplified example to drive this point home. So suppose a client has deep sadness and hurt about not having a sense of belonging in a current context, so being shunned by some group of friends. And they come to you and this cuts deep to the bone. And as I explore this current context, allowing the deep sadness and hurt, and oftentimes, or often other times in which the client, in the client's life, when they had a similar kind of theme happening or is prevalent in their life, spontaneously emerges in their awareness. That sense of belonging and some pain around that. Any other times in the life when that happens seems to come up when you emotionally connect with it in the current context. So that's an example of cultivating an emotional connection, which is different than an intellectual connection. We're not trying to mentally excavate these other times or use analysis to dip into the past. They just naturally emerge when connecting to the sadness about this not belonging in the current context. For me, it's just like we have this emotional time track inside of us that spontaneously directs our attention to these other times and contexts where the beliefs and constructs or somatic holding patterns were repeated or even formed. So through acknowledging and allowing these emotional connections, clients can access and share specific information about these implicit memories and the beliefs they hold. And for those who are keeping up with neuroscientific explanations of change, it's becoming popular. Here's how I would explain what I just described in simple neuroscientific terms. These implicit memories that comprise the constructs, beliefs, or emotional schemas are found in our amygdala in the limbic system. And intellectual, rational thinking is a function of the neocortical area of the brain. So the neocortical cannot access nor change these implicit memories in the limbic system. So have you ever tried to rationally talk someone out of their fearful state? No matter how much rational evidence you presented, it has no impact. That's an example. The person is activated in the limbic system, and you were talking from and appealing to their neocortical. So it takes direct access to these memories for the neural pathways to be open. And only when they're open can new neural pathways be formed for change to occur. Okay, so I said a lot here, so let me summarize this particular principle. I'm saying that it's more effective to work at an emotional level instead of an intellectual level, if the intention is to cultivate effortless transformations. In order to do that, I developed a set of practices and protocols that prevents me from unwittingly causing emotional disconnections with clients as we're going along in the session. Also, increase my emotional literacy to optimal levels so that I could hold space for clients to experience their feelings even when they were not aware of their feelings. I also learned to listen from presence to support deep emotional connections. So all these practices and protocols created an invitation for clients to open their emotional pathways and make effortless transformation possible. Okay, brings us to the third principle, which is placing priority on experiential work with clients will yield transformative insights that are not possible with talk about or story about engagements. This is kind of similar to the second one, but it's got some different nuance here. So in keeping with the principle of guiding clients to become and stay emotionally connected, I found one of the more powerful ways to accomplish this is to make the session experiential. So in a supportive context, there seems to be a strong tendency for people to talk about or go into stories about their experience. Other clients may speak from a kind of a detached spiritual stance, devoid of feelings about their experience. And all of these I consider, just forms of protection. And if allowed to pervade the session without awareness, the session will be about protection, and this could go on indefinitely. So let me review an example of a client who otherwise had a peaceful life, came in and she wanted to transform her reaction she was having to her husband. She was surprised by how much intensity that was coming up in her reaction to her husband. So she begins to tell stories about all the times he was inconsiderate and said and did things that she interpreted as not valuing her, and she reacts. She goes into analyzing his defects and talks about her theories about why he does what he does to her. And this is what I consider typical talk about or story about session where she's expressing herself with thoughts, but is not connected to her feelings. Well, I could chime in with her and talk about, with her talking about disposition and validate her story about how he is this or that, or by speaking up about how mean men are or insensitive or considerate they are, etc. But this would only serve to keep her identified with that story, which would be in essence colluding with her protective stance and support. And I'd be supporting her to not acknowledge and connect to her deeper feelings. So from a spiritual perspective, I could easily proclaim her story has arisen out of ego and that she must transcend it. This too would be invalidating her experience. It could easily be interpreted by her that there's something wrong or unspiritual with her for expressing her grievances. So by invalidating, I've added a new layer of disconnection from feelings. Not only is she not feeling her feelings because they are too painful to acknowledge, now she won't even feel them because to do so means she's entrenched in her ego and unspiritual. So instead of validating or invalidating her experience in a inner presence inquiry session, I would ask her to pick a time when she reacted strongly to something her husband said or did. I would use this specific context to start the inquiry, and that would make the session experiential. I would ask her to recall the scene where her husband said or did something that triggered her. As she recalls the specific scene, I would ask her to check inside to see what she was feeling and what she was wanting and that she wasn't getting in that moment in that particular context. After a few moments of interconnecting, she would report she was, feeling hurt and wanted to know that she was valued. So the hurt feelings were acknowledged and felt in the moment, and it was both painful and relieving to her to feel the hurt in the moment. It kind of moved her away from the blaming story and talking about him. She was feeling her feelings and connecting to them. So this prompting did turn the session from a talk about session into an experiential session. It's a kind of a real simple example. But there's lots of techniques and methods for making the session more experiential that I incorporate into the inner presence work. It's kind of too numerous to get into here. The main point I want you to get, and here's the difference between getting seduced by a client's story and either responding in some validating or invalidating way, between that and keeping the experiential focus throughout the session. For me, the experiential approach I found is a different quality of support that is loyal to that intention of creating the conditions for this effortless transformation to occur that I've been talking about. Okay, so on to the next one. Paying attention to context will bring clarity and focus to the session and allow emotionally rich material to emerge. Again, that's related to the one I just mentioned. The first consideration is, what is the client coming to you for? Is there something they want to explore or transform? Most people come for a reason. How do they articulate that? For example, maybe they want to work with their reactivity to their mother or father, or maybe they have something holding them back that they want, a career, a relationship, more success, etc. Or maybe they want to work on their attachment to their ego. So whatever they come in with, this is usually expressed, I've found, in broad general terms. They begin with high level abstractions that I need to kind of hone down. For example, reactivity with your mother can be honed down to a specific time and context when the reactivity emerged, and exploring what happened specifically in terms of emotional triggers, body sensations, judgmental thoughts of the mother or their self. Even though there might be more than one context of a similar theme where clients get triggered, starting with one that has some intensity yields a lot of information. So same thing is true of working with somebody who wants to work on something that's holding them back, So you find a context where there's a strong reluctance to act, or maybe an overwhelming inertia when there is an intention to move forward on something. Suppose the client, supporting the client to connect to the specific occurrence is a great starting context for the session. Working on somebody that wants to work on an attachment to ego, turns into, hey, name a specific time, circumstance, context in which you, the client, see being attached to your ego, Also, I find it useful to uh, ask them what they mean by ego. After they reveal a specific context, you have the basis to explore, feelings, body sensations, thoughts, judgments in an experiential way. So I hope you get the idea here through these 3 examples why it might be important to start with something specific. It brings a lot of efficiency to your support because it helps keep a focus to the session, and it gives clients a chance to be emotionally connected to specific occurrences, which gives so much more defining nuance to their challenge. And to offer such clarity to your clients requires you to be able to stay clear yourself and hone down over generalized, abstract explanations from the client in order to, cleanly start a session. Okay, so the next one is holding a non-pathological regard by dropping all the labels. Will free support professionals and clients from being trapped in a reality that something is wrong with clients or something is missing. My attitude about labels changed many years ago when I started questioning psychological labels that are promoted in the psychological field. The psychological field uses the language of the diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders, which catalogs symptoms of diagnostic labels. These labels and viewpoints associated with them have found their way in the vernacular of a larger culture. Many clients come in predisposed to accepting the use and authority of these labels. You might commonly hear lay people, talk about, she's a little OCD, or he has narcissistic tendencies, or she's borderline, etc. So clients viewing themselves, or us viewing clients through these lenses overtly or covertly can transmit to the clients the message that something is wrong with them and needs to be fixed. I think it's one of the unintended consequences. And it's easy, for clients to attach meaning that whatever they are labeled is not good or not mentally healthy or not spiritual. Besides that, using these pathological labels, language, tells people what they are. And it's easy for them to form an identity around such a label. Another pitfall is I think it encourages a good-bad self-system that fits neatly into a dualistic approach to life where things are either right, wrong, or good or bad. Like I said, clients often interpret such labels in totalistic ways about themselves, and which has the effect of constricting the flow of their life energy. These labels just aren't in psychological field. Similar labeling systems can happen for people in spiritual groups or personal growth groups. For example, a particular spiritual path might convey the message that being angry is bad or wrong because it's such a departure from whatever is idealized on the path, maybe loving kindness or non-attachment or equanimity or enlightenment. You might hear people whisper in spiritual circles, he needs to do more work on his anger. So there's a pathological regard for anger as being bad, wrong, or unspiritual. Or maybe in a personal growth approach, looks at emotional reactions as a sign of being attached to ego. And here you might hear comments like, she's ego bound, or he's really attached to his ego. Yeah, so those labels I started deconstructing many years ago. And, at this point, you might be asking, if you're not viewing people through the lenses of these labels, how are you viewing people? And what I've done over the years is I just taught myself and others to adopt an attitude of unconditional allowing of whatever emerges in the client's experience. Not only that, I actively support clients to invite all aspects of themselves into the session and encourage them to connect to feelings, thoughts, judgments, body sensations, and to inquire what this emergent part might be wanting. So this unconditional, without labels, this unconditional approach encourages deeper parts of ourselves to feel safe and come forth and have a chance of being heard and understood. So when doing an inner presence session, adopting and utilizing these formal protocols to encourage such allowance, what it does is it prevents me from fouling the session by unconsciously conveying disallowing energy. For example, if I have a part of me that thinks it's unspiritual to get angry, or have an angry person in my past that caused me a lot of pain, my disallowance energy may unconsciously seep into the session by encouraging the client to disallow or have a negative attitude about his or her anger. And so what I need to do is I need to tend to my own disallowance energy and transform it into allowance to be a more effective support person. So this is important to keep track of that on the coach side. If the intention is to support clients deeply from presence. So I want you to, in conclusion about this one, I want you to know that there are many effective ways to support others without using psychological labels or parse out experience as good or bad or right or wrong. I've created this whole system of inquiry based upon allowance and non-pathological labels. And I also want to be clear here, I'm not saying using labels is wrong or bad. They very well may be effective in the particular paradigms in which they're used. I just found them not to be effective in the particular system of support I've created here. Number 6, allowing your support in a session to be gentle, non-invasive, and client-directed. It's kind of a mouthful. So out of the space of noble intentions, many of in the helping profession think in terms of breaking through client resistance or confronting clients with brutal honesty to wake them up, which can mean making a lot of harsh judgments or interpretations about the client's experience. Sometimes helping professionals can engage in tough love, and which usually has some kind of harshness associated with it. Or maybe a spiritual coach is engaged in ego busting, where the teacher gets to decide when the student is acting out of ego, etc. I've always found these approaches problematic and doubted their long-term effectiveness. With each of these approaches, there is an assumption, albeit a hidden assumption, that the helping professional knows what is best for the client instead of the client's body-mind system. That somehow they are going to kick down the client's wall of protection and transformations on the other side. So many, many years ago, I recall reading a quote that said something along the lines of, there's no such thing as psychological resistance, just an unskilled therapist. And that was inspiring to me. I stopped looking at client reluctance to explore something as them not wanting to grow. Instead, I looked at resistance as a part that is serving the body-mind system in important ways with protective roles and functions. So treating these parts like they're obstructions, something to get around, and using aggressive means to circumvent their protective role doesn't exactly inspire trust from the body-mind system of the client, in my view. If you treat the protective aspects in such harsh manner, the deep disowned aspects of the client that hides in fear won't want to engage. It's not safe. The other possibility is that these deeper parts, the pain they hold, will come up to the surface prematurely. You know, like ripping a Band-Aid off and the scab coming with it. So clients coming to their own conclusions about protection, you know, how they protect themselves, and deciding on their own safety, I found to be much more effective in terms of trust and the depth of access. And allowing clients to self-direct, I experience as also facilitating depth. How deep and where we go internally during a inner presence inquiry session is under the volition of each person's comfort level, you know, self-trust and safety. So supporting the inquirer to go beyond comfort levels or protection is permission-based only, or offered as a suggestion. There's no attempts to break through these protective structures with any kind of confrontational methods. So it's very gentle, non-invasive. I found this inspires cooperation and trust, both internally and externally, with the support person. I found there's nothing more powerful than to awaken and make space for the client's innate intelligence to participate in the session in terms of what needs to happen or not happen. Okay, so moving on. Number 7, supporting clients with non-prescriptive contributions. So what I'm referring to here is, prescribing what the client should believe or shouldn't believe, or what they should or shouldn't be doing with their life, are 2 ways we can unwittingly superimpose our values on the client. There's so many ways we can consciously and unconsciously prescribe our values and superimpose our own system of meaning onto the client, to mention here, but this can have an effect of overshadowing or even silencing the client's own values and system of meaning. And if we do that, what happens is we're missing out on valuable information the client's body-mind system holds that can be key to moving into that effortless transformation space. For example, let's say you're working with a client that is very talented and has low self-worth about their particular talent. You've seen the client's work and know it's that he's very talented and has no reason to think of himself in such a diminishing manner. So, one tendency is to try to bolster his self-esteem, and you might speak up and try to convince him that he shouldn't feel bad about himself or related to his work. It's obvious his stuff is excellent. You might use reason and comparison with other people who are revered to try to convince him. My guess is this convincing would do little or nothing to support this client. He might temporarily feel good from the praise you gave him, but this is not working with the client's system of meaning, in my view of things. So instead, supporting supporting in this way can learn to step back. We can view the low self-worth as not something to be changed, but something to be welcomed and allowed, like I said earlier. And emotionally connect with the perfectly good reasons why it makes sense in his system of meaning to hold low self-worth about this talent, how it serves him. We can adopt this attitude or perspective of not knowing and being continuously curious, which allows a client's system of meaning to emerge and inform us. So I've been humbled many times over the years, thinking I knew what was best for the client, only to be proven incorrect, with my interpretation. I've found ways to approach inner work that keeps this tendency in check in myself, so I don't contaminate the session with such prescriptiveness. And one of the things I've done with the inner presence work is I make it an open inquiry. There's no predetermined expected outcomes that are held up in the session. We simply have the intention to focus on supporting and cultivating those emotional connections and whatever emerge in the client's experience, while trusting that such connections will yield something useful for the client. We also have protocols to work within the client's system of meaning and that rely upon the innate wisdom of each learner's body-mind system. All right. Number 8. Working in the present with a client can reduce their identification with parts of them that are emerging with past and future stories. So what I've noticed over the years is some psychospiritual approaches teach that the past or the future are not relevant and we need to focus on the present and only the now matters. Other approaches focus on healing the past and put a lot of attention in delving into the past in various ways. Yet other approaches say resolving the past is futile and you can get bound up in trying to do that, and it's better to focus on creating a better future, to be goal-oriented. So the inner presence work acknowledges and incorporates all these perspectives with the realization that memories and future projections take on a different dimension when they arise in and are connected with presence in the moment. So working in the presence in an inner presence session means we attune to and engage in whole presence for whatever is organically emerging in the client's experience during the session. We are not excavating the past, like I said earlier, nor are we creating future goals in a deliberate way. If a client has a memory arise in a session when exploring a current context, we invite it in to the presence, hold presence for it in an emotionally vivid way. If the client has future projections emerge in the session, we invite it into the session and be present to it again and connect with it in an emotionally vivid way. There's a quality difference between being totally identified with a past memory or future projection with no awareness and inviting past memories and future projections into the here and now awareness for consideration. So the inner presence work is about cultivating a high degree of presence, practicing maintaining that presence when challenging memories and future projections emerge for both client and facilitator. Okay, last but not least is verifying that effortless transformations have happened. So how do we know when transformation has happened with clients? Do we trust our evaluations and perceptions? Do we take the client's word for it? the question of how do we know points back to the particular definition of transformation we use and the specific markers that are used that indicate transformation has happened. Over the years, I've grown skeptical of clients' glowing reviews of the impact of sessions because I've seen how such reviews can be clients' protective parts protecting them. Perhaps they offer up a positive glowing account to tell me when they think they think that's what I want to hear as a deflection to inquire further or to please me personally. I've seen how these glowing reviews can be attempts to change the focus of the session that is the potential of going deeper. So to give me assurance that transformation has actually happened, I again rely upon the client's body-mind system to tell me. For example, if a client was bringing presence to anxiety about talking in front of a group in a series of sessions and declares that it's no longer a problem, I might ask them to do a little exercise to determine the depth of transformation. What I'd have them do is I'd have the client imagine standing in front of a group of people and notice all the people looking at him. When I got a sense he was really putting himself in that scene, I would ask him to notice what is happening in his body. I'd ask him to see himself speaking and share what feelings were coming up, what thoughts or self-judgments might be occurring, if any. If the client holds steady in this imagined context that was previously terrifying, then I would have some confidence that transformation has happened. If the client is triggered with fear or shutting down or engaged in self-judgments, then I would suspect there needs more work needs to be done, more presence to that particular part. So I believe it's important to incorporate these checking questions and exercises in whatever system of personal spiritual growth you might utilize. For me, it keeps us accountable and gives us feedback about our effectiveness so we can know for sure we're making the optimal contribution to clients. Okay, so that's the 9 principles. If you're interested or resonating with this and like to explore it deeper, like I said at the beginning of the month, I have a 9-month program starting September 14th, and more information about that can be had at innerpresencecoaching.com. There's also an early bird special that's on, so if you're interested, you might want to pursue it immediately. And I'd like to open it up to questions, and I'll stay after the hour if anybody has a question. Just go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll call on you. Anyone? No questions? How was that? You're saying I was that clear in all these things I said today? If you're on a phone, it's *9, I think. You have something, Bill? Bill, let's see. Yes, Bill?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
When you were talking about no such thing as client resistance, is that where gatekeeper comes in, your term gatekeeper?
Yeah, gatekeeper or protective parts, yeah.
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 Okay.
Synonymous, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else? Question, comment? Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, then thanks everybody for showing up, and let me see here. Well, got a chat here. Hold on. Yeah, so the question is, what do I do if a protective part comes in? Do I just acknowledge it? No, there's a whole protocol thing of how to work with protection. If a particular part comes in, we acknowledge it, we work with it, we empathize with it to the extent that it allows us and gives us a green light to work with anything else that might be associated with that protective part. Another short way of putting that is we get the green light to work with whatever it's protecting. Anyone else? You could do a chat too. I forgot about that. Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay. What do you do? So. Yeah, at some point we might ask that the part is to ask it if it would step aside or stand with you as you connect with deeper parts. If it says no, then deeper or more connection needs to be had there with that protective part. If it says yes, then you got the green light to go. Yep. Yeah, but one of the keys to gently supporting getting to deeper parts past the protection is that you really want to get solid information about what does it fear happening if it lets go of protection. There's a lot of different reasons that it could hold, and getting that specific reason gives it a sense of understanding, or that you heard it. And sometimes you can even negotiate. If it's afraid of being overwhelmed with painful feelings, then you negotiate. Yeah, we don't want you to be overwhelmed with painful feelings. Yeah. So we stay curious. Yes. Yeah. And we but the navigating protection is all gentle, permission based, and negotiating. If the session itself holds a value that you don't want the client to be overwhelmed with painful feelings and become identified, then you're on the same page with that protective part. And that protective part, knowing that, will really appreciate that, and more than likely allow a green light to go further. However, if the client is totally immersed and identified with the protective part and doesn't see it as just a part, that's where your coaching skills come in, and asking them to step back and be in presence to that part. That's where your wider view will support them in doing that. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Chats? Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming by, and check out the site, and hope to see you in one of our programs. And